Hello. I just wanted to talk real quick about the last book I read. This being Moby, and I think it's a good moment to also just clarify a couple of things, just in case anyone is watching. Because this is one of those books that it really pisses me off to have to make a video of like a few minutes or an hour, but I have a life and I am studying and I am reading many other books on the side that are non-fiction that require like sometimes an hour per page, and maybe that's an exaggeration but close to that. So I just cannot afford to talk as much about this book as I would want, or to read it as many times as I would like to, because this has been an amazing read, and it has been a book that, like, one of those books, probably the first time that happened to me with a novel, that I not only did I feel like there was more to it, that I could really read it, but that it made me feel small. The size, I'm not talking about the physical size, but the size of the abstract mental exploration, theological exploration, literary enterprise, Homeric biblical elucubration of this book it goes way beyond what I could do with a single read, and definitely it made me feel like disoriented at times, and I would love to have reread it. However, on that note, I want to also say that I reread every book I read, in the sense that, like, not every book, but every book that I read that deserves a reread, I'm already doing that as I read. I haven't done many rereads cover to cover of a book that I already read, because every time I read a book, I tend to read every page twice. I don't know if anyone does that, but like, for me, it's like I just get lost otherwise. It's either I sit down and especially now, especially in English, especially in this kind of English, the aesthetics, the literature, like Melville is just amazing. Like it's been the best thing I've read so far in English. But that also makes it more difficult for me, as English is not only not my first language, but I also did not learn English in school. I learned English working, so that's also an impediment. Which means that I want to read this book 5 times, and I would have wanted to read 5 times and maybe read like secondary literature on it like a lot before making a 10-hour video on this topic, on this book. But I'm not able to do that. Nevertheless, there are many sources. I hope I can find some that I can sort of link down, just in case someone comes across this video someday and want to use those. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I am using this channel as almost like as a diary. I've been writing commentaries on the things I read forever. Like, I have a few hundred very like 2,000 words commentaries on books I've read from the last years. But that is like a personal diary on my Google Drive. So this is, for me, this is just become like sort of more public summary or presentation of what I tend to write there, but it's very personal. It's never been focused on being sort of like consumed by anyone. That's why I have like hundreds that no one has ever read. And I thought this would be a more productive way to also make sense of things, because sometimes I don't have time to sit down and write, especially because when I sit down and write, I tend to write for way longer than I was planning. But if I sit down and talk, eventually I will come off, like there will be a long silence, and I will realize that, okay, I have nothing to say anymore. Also, I feel like sometimes when you say things, they sort of sink in the mind and get in memory way better. So this is sort of like a supplement to something I'm doing on the side, writing commentaries on the books I read. Those commentaries are way more cohesive and coherent, and the arguments in them and the exploration of the books in them is way deeper, as it tends to happen in general with anything that is written versus anything that is sort of like spoken or presented. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I will eventually sort of probably like put them somewhere, because most of them, especially the ones from the last year, are presentable. Like I wrote them like essays, and they have that structure, and I could use them as scripts. But the point of talking to the camera is to sort of learn to improvise and be able to like present ideas about things I have read without having to rely on text as well. This is like very time consuming. If I start editing and I start writing a script for it and everything, then I just wouldn't be able to do half as much. I am already not even talking about a 1% of the book, not a 1%, but I'm leaving more than half of the things I'm reading out, and only talking about those books that are like more significant, precisely because of that lack of time. Because like after this I have to go to the library and start studying, and then come back and a whole many things. So yeah, that's, I don't know if that's me excusing myself or just clarifying things just in case anyone ever comes across this video, but that's what I wanted to say. Now, let's talk about this book. The first thing is that I had heard so much about the book, and I'm sure you too, before starting to read it, that I had some preconceived ideas. So let's talk about what the book is not. It is not an encyclopedia. It has chapters on cytology, it has chapters on it has many chapters that some would call non-fiction. And it has many chapters that feel like digressions. Someone could say that more than half of the book are digressions from the plot. But that's not really what comes across on the first pages. When one opens the book, the first thing that they come across is the extracts. Like extracts from Genesis, from the book of Jonah. Just completely out of context. That's something that like can be sort of quite shocking. You wouldn't expect that. You would expect like a, what the author would say in his first letters of like a romantic book of whaling period. But that sort of like biblical starting is a clue of what the book will become. Because one of my favorite booktubers, Steve Donaghy, he says that there's two books fighting inside here. One is called The Whale and the other one is called Moby. And I fully like, when I watched the video, I was like, that's exactly how it feels. That's it. There is, and that is also the reason why, as I said before, it makes you feel disoriented, because not only do you not know what's going on and how this is gonna end, not in an explicit sense, but what kind of book is it gonna be to you at the end. But also the writer seems to not know, and you start and there's like, okay, first person narrator, Ismael, presentation of characters, okay, and sort of like a journey that's about to start, all of that. Very, even some humor, it's just easy to read when you start. It feels like it's gonna be sort of like a classic in the most conventional sense. But then you get to, I think it's the first chapter that sort of gave me that feeling, is the sermon. Yeah, I think it was the sermon when you get this sort of like sermon that is meant to be, I think I heard somewhere that it's meant to be like a parody of like a very sort of Christianized idea of whaling, but it feels like a prophecy of what the wood will become, and then it goes back to being what it is, we lose the narrator at some point, and with the narrator we lose part of the triviality of the book, we lose part of the familiar, and that is where the book shows you what it's not. So what did I think this book was? I thought this book was a longer version of The Old Man and the Sea, and this was not a relation of books that I made by myself. I heard a lot of people say that. How can someone read this book cover to cover and come to the conclusion that this has anything to do with The Old Man and the Sea? To say that this book is like The Old Man and the Sea is like saying that is that because it happens on a boat and it's fishermen? It's because it's on the sea that those two books are the same thing? Because if you read the book, if you look at the structure, if you look at what it's really treating, the themes that it's treating and how it does that, if you look at what Moby Dick might represent, anything, there's no relation. It's like saying that, I don't know, Anna Karenina and Crime and Banishment are the same kind of book because they're both Russian books. Doesn't make any sense. So yeah, this is not The Old Man and the Sea. I think The Old Man and the Sea is a really good book, but this is something else completely. And I feel like that of the side, I did get a feeling throughout the book of reading The Peregrine, like a whale version of The Peregrine. I don't know how. What's the name of the author? J.A. Baker. I feel like if I were to compare this book to a different one, I think that there is an aspect of The Peregrine, not so much with the whales themselves, but with whaling and the whaling experience as a whole. I totally recommend that book, by the way. The Peregrine is an amazing book, but it's also part of what seduced me about this book, and that was my sort of early correlation of this book with what I already knew. I tend to really like authors that get obsessed with a certain topic, being this topic like the most trivial or the most profound. At the end, like when you get a mind like Melville's, or like J. Baker, because that book was also very fucking mind-blowing in many senses, then it doesn't really matter the thing that they're talking about. They can be talking about pipes. It will feel like they found the answer to the question of life. And similarly, you know, this book shouldn't have been called The Whale, because it's not about a whale. Moby Dick appears only at the end of the book, and very briefly, and you can see that it was more the journey to get to the whale than anything else. And that will come back to us. But so what is Moby Dick? What is this book? There's many readings that we could make of the book. I think one of the most obvious things I've heard being said about the book is that it's just like very homoerotic, and it's sort of like a manifestation, you know, like in a very psychoanalytic reading, one could say that that the whale is sort of like the virility that Melville was trying to recover, that was taken away from him. You know, I think it was Steve Donoghue that said that perhaps Ahab lost more than a leg to the whale, to Moby Dick. And that in a context of the 19th century, in which you know, homosexuality was not yet normalized or anything like that, one could sort of like see how the extreme sexualization of Q-Kick at the beginning, and then of other peers of Ishmael in the boat, speaks to a repressed aspect of Melville's sexuality that just couldn't be manifested explicitly. But it is very explicit the way he says that sort of like they had a honeymoon together and were married. And even there is a point when like turns out that in this boat, the harpooners are tightened to the other person on board. So basically, Kukek and Ishmael are like they are tied by a rope together. When they are fishing, this makes them more efficient and to take care of each other more, I guess. And that reminds me so much of the Tebas battalion in ancient Greece. This was like in ancient Greece, basically, important families would have would give a patron to their kids, someone older that would take care of them, in order to introduce them to social life and everything, but also to the sexual life. So it was basically like a pedophilic a relationship in which sort of like the benefit that the kid would get is the sort of like an introduction to the world of ancient Greece, I guess, to like the societal roles and work, and also to be protected. And many of these, they were considered basically lovers, and sort of like in Tebas they took advantage of that, and they chained them to each other, thinking that probably the lovers would sort of like fight way more with way more courage, because sort of like the person they loved would be looking at them. So that's sort of like the idea. And I just saw that there's for me a clear correlation there. If we are gonna make that psychoanalytic reading, I'm talking about it mainly because it's the only one that I haven't seen already being said on YouTube. Most people tend to focus on the theological, which is all over the place. But yeah, I definitely really really like the. I definitely like to think of the like the repressed sexuality of authors from this time, because there is, sometimes they manage to hide it, or they manage to not make it extremely obvious. Other times, I think this is one of those cases, it just comes out and it's very hard to ignore. I recommend anyone who is interested on this specific aspect of the book to read and probably reread, if you've already read the book, I Squeeze of the Hand. It's an amazing passage. I'm just not going to read it out loud because I'm not huge in reading out loud in English, but yeah, it's just so good. Yeah, it's just amazing. I'll just read a line. It says, "Come, let us squeeze hands all round. Aye, let us squeeze ourselves into each other. Let us squeeze ourselves universally into the very milk and sperm of kindness." This is very out of context, but I just thought it was very funny. Also, still on that line, when one looks at the whale and the whale's head and how they talk about like the whale has no face, like both eyes are sort of like on the sides where we'll have the ears. So you can never look at the whale in the face. I think we could also like reread that and say that actually the whale has two faces, which I think is also an interesting way to look at it, especially because like on the first passages they also refer to the whale as the Leviathan. A Leviathan was like the enemy of like, it would be like sort of like a nemesis to God, right? But also the whiteness of the whale has the sort of like horror aspect, there is the chapter on the whiteness of the whale where they talk about like, the whale, the whiteness is something that we see on death, on ghosts, everything that we fear. Sometimes that fear is emphasized by the whiteness that it presents. But also the white is the color of light, right? Is white as a color, in fact, is both the absence of all color and the mixture of all colors. Like chromatically, all colors are contained within the white. Yet it's the only color that you cannot get at by mixing colors. So yeah, it's like nothingness versus everything, and from there you can derive theistic or atheistic readings talking about God or meaning, and the whale being that. Even if you are, again, going back to the psychoanalytic, I mean, you only have to look at a whale to see how phallic they are. Many fishes are phallic. As a professional scuba diver, I can confirm that. So yeah, I just thought that's funny. However, it's completely irrelevant, and personally, I don't think that it really takes us very far. Generally, psychoanalysis doesn't do that. I think it's interesting, but it's definitely not. So what, the guy wanted to fuck UK, and he felt like part of his sexuality was being repressed. His libido was manifested in the whale. I'm trying to hunt the whale to get back my cock. Yeah, that's definitely, you can do that reading, but I don't really see where did you get with that. I don't really see how that is interesting. It's anecdotic. It's can be funny, period. But yeah, not more than that. Now, on the other hand, I think that within that sort of like homoerotic relationship that he develops with QK being like, a cannibal that was a prince and has like tattoos all over his body, and those tattoos like they contained the answer to the question of life or something, the universe, the meaning of the universe, but they're in a language that no one can understand, right? That this is like all the lucubrations that Ismail makes. And then he talks about the honeymoon, and like you have a very beautiful chapter about some friend where like you see, I really like the relationship that he develops, and I think it's just a very profound relationship. And I think all of these chapters, including the squeeze of the hand, speak more to like a craving, a yearning that Melville had for universal communion and just like infinite brother and sisterhood with fellow human beings and maybe beings in general. Another thing that I see in this book is a critique on revenge in general. It's not only that trying to take revenge from an animal, it doesn't make any sense. From a non-human animal, doesn't make any sense. But I think that revenge in general is just, I think it's a critique on revenge, period. And in that sense, it's a very successful one. I'm not gonna say definitely Ahab is a tragic character, but I think that his more serious aspect, which is the fury that he has, and how he's sort of presented with possibilities for redemption, when he meets the Delight and the Rachel, and like he could have taken a different route. He could have actually decided to not condemn the whole tripulation, everyone, to hunt a single whale just because he could not get over the fact of what he lost to Moby Dick. But that specific obsession makes him, for me, a more comic than tragic character. And the way in which he dies is pretty ironic, It's like it's tragic as much as it is funny. At least that's my opinion. So, going back to the digressions and this book not being encyclopedia, but also not being, it's not like Les Miserables where you could remove some pages and improve the book. In this case, the digressions are the book. Getting lost in the book is part of the experience. The extracts at the beginning that are kind of shocking and you would be like, I don't need these extracts, I'm gonna be reading them throughout the book at some point. What is that there? That you can skip them? No, don't skip them, because you read them, they're a clue, then you read the book, it feels at the beginning like it's something else. And then you get to, like the book The Whale disappears and the book Moby Dick starts to emerge. And you feel the writer trying to hide behind the carpet, under the carpet, Moby Dick, and keep talking about the whale, but he can't. It's just too much and too strong and too it's what he had in him to write, and he finally gives up and allows that force that like dormant dragon to awaken, and it does awake, and you need to get lost in those chapters that try to contain everything there is to know about whaling. This book, like anything you need to know, is self-contained in the book. You don't need anything else. You need all of that because the book doesn't work so much as a book as it does as a puzzle or a labyrinth. It's a device made to get you lost, and once you get lost, just collect the pieces that are given to you, and at some point it makes sense. And no puzzle makes sense until it's complete. And I don't know if this book is complete, but it definitely has a start in that sense. The start is giving you a sense of a familiar place. Then you halfway through the book being like, where am I? What is happening? Why am I reading about the different kinds of whales, and why some are bigger than others, and why their heads are not so similar as someone might think, and then why am I reading about the whiteness of the whale, and then you go back to the story, and the story still is complemented with incredible chapters like the Sphinx and the symphony and the whiteness of the whale, and the squeeze of a hand, and so much here to take. I think the Sphinx might be not my favorite, but the funeral and the Sphinx are like two very interesting passages. The symphony as well, Okay, I cannot find it now. I'm so bad with this. Squeeze of hand has been 70. See here where. The Sphinx had like a passage that I'm just gonna read you, so that you get a feeling of the power of the book. I'm not a great reader, I'll say it again, but I think you'll come across as what it is. So when you read the Cytology chapters and everything that feels trivial, just know that it's part of the basement for other reflections in other chapters like this that are like you just don't expect them. It was black and hooded, and it was a black and hooded head, and hanging there in the midst of so intense a calm, it seemed the Sphinx in the desert. Speak, thou vast and venerable head, Mother Ahab, which thou ungarnished with a beard, yet here and there lookest hoary with Moses. Speak, mighty head, and tell us the secret thing that there is in thee. Of all divers, thou hast dived the deepest. That head upon which the upper sun now gleams has moved amid this world's foundations, where unrecorded names and navies rushed, and untold hopes and anchors wrought, where in the murderous hold of this frigate earth is ballasted with bones of millions of the drowned. There, in that awful waterland, there was thy most familiar home. Thou hast been where bell or diver never went, hast led by many a sailor's side, where the sleepless mothers would give their lives to lay them down. Thou saw'st the looked lovers when leaping from their flaming ship, heart to heart they sank, beneath the exulting wave, true to each other, when heaven seemed false to them. Thou saw'st the murdered maid when tossed by pirates from the midnight deck, For hours he fell into the deeper midnight of the insatiate maw, and his murderers still sailed unarmed, while swift lightnings severed the neighboring ship that would have borne a righteous husband to outstretch longing arms. O head, thou hast sinned enough to split the planets and make an infidel of Abraham. And not one syllable is thine. O nature and O soul of man, how far beyond all utterance are your linked analogies, nor the smallest atoms stir or lives in the matter, but has its cunning duplicate in mind. Yeah, I think it's just amazing. I'm not used to read out loud in English, as you can see, but I hope part of the beauty of that extract comes across to you. So I'm just gonna skip right to the end. I've seen many videos that read The Whiteness of the Whale. I think it's a key chapter to understand what I was saying before. Sort of like that journey in search for something more transcendental than a specific being, be that a whale or whatever. But I think meaning, it's a much better word than God, because it speaks more to our century and our generation, our present, and I think that at the end of the day, God is a different word for meaning. Godot, if you will. We could say that Moby Dick is Godot, or the moon that Caligula from Albert Camus' play wanted to sort of grab. Those are all for me the same. The moon that Caligula wanted, Godot that Beckett's characters wait for, Moby Dick, Ithaca. So to finish this, I'm gonna try to read a poem that I like, to end on a more optimistic, hopeful note. And you can make your correlations between why am I reading this poem and why do I think that it's relevant to the book, to Moby Dick. And the poem is Ithaca by Gaddafi, and it's one of my favorite poems. This is the first time I read it in English. I've only ever read it in Spanish, but I think it's I think that, as much as it is biblical, this book is extremely Homeric, and I think that it's key, the fact that Moby Dick doesn't appear so much in the book. Moby Dick is not that important. It's the pursuit for something that gives this book, it's that quest for a object of transcendence or meaning that really matters when we talk about this book. So I'm just gonna read out loud and we finish there. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your road is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Like Strigonian, Cyclops, angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way. As long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and your body, like Strigonian, Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them alongside, inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you. Melville could have been said that he set them up in Moby Dick in front of him. Hope your road is a long one, Might there be many summer mornings when, with a pleasure, what a joy, what a pleasure, what a joy, you enter harbors where you are seeing for the first time. Might you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, sensual perfume of every kind, and many sensual perfumes as you can. And might you visit many Egyptian cities to learn and go on learning from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Keep Moby Dick always in your mind. Arriving there is what you are destined for, but don't hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years, so you are old by the time you reach the island. Healthy, wealthy, with all you've gained on the way, not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you wouldn't have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you will have understood by then what these Ithacas really mean. I definitely don't understand what Ithaca really means, but I'll say that Moby Dick is a premise for the amazing quest, the amazing journey that Melville takes us through that book. And that's all. Amazing book. I recommend it, and I hope I will have time to talk about the next book I'm reading, even if it's so poorly as this one. Have a nice day.